The alarms started screaming at 0600 station time. Dr. Hana was in the xenobiology lab when the first explosion shook the walls. Glass containers fell from the shelves and shattered on the floor. The samples she had been studying for 3 months spilled across her workstation. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "What was that?" her assistant asked, eyes wide with fear. Hana didn't answer. She was already moving toward the communication panel on the wall. Her fingers hit the emergency channel button. Static crackled through the speakers, then a voice broke through. It was Tay from the communications center. "All personnel, we are under attack. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Unknown ships have disabled our shields. Raiders are boarding the station. Move to defensive positions immediately." Hana felt her stomach drop. Raiders. The word sent ice through her veins. Everyone in the galaxy knew what raiders meant. Slavery. Death. Entire colonies disappearing into the dark markets where no one asked questions. She looked at her assistant and the 4 other researchers in the lab. They were all frozen, staring at her. Hana took a deep breath. Someone had to think clearly. "Lock down the lab," she said. Her voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. "Seal the lower-level access points. Get everyone who can't fight into the storage rooms, now." The station shook again. This time it was worse. The lights flickered and went out for 3 seconds before the emergency power kicked in. Red lights bathed everything in an angry glow. In the communications center, 5 floors above, Tay was working faster than he had ever worked in his life. His fingers flew across the control board. The raiders had cut the main transmitters, but Tay had spent 2 years maintaining these systems. He knew every backup, every redundancy, every trick the builders had put in. He rerouted power from the damaged primary array to a secondary system that most people didn't even know existed. It was old technology, slower than modern systems, but it would work. It had to work. Come on," he whispered to the machine. Another explosion rocked the station. Tay could hear weapons fire in the corridors outside. The security teams were fighting back. He didn't have much time. The secondary system came online. Tay's screen lit up with green indicators. He had maybe 5 minutes before the raiders found this room and shut him down permanently. His hands moved without thinking, typing out the emergency code that every human ship in the sector would recognize. Distress signal Meridian Station. Coordinates 447 Alpha 992. Under attack by unknown raiders. 847 civilians. Need immediate assistance. Sending continuous updates on secondary channel. He hit send and prayed to every god he could remember that someone was listening. 3 floors down, Day was turning the station's central hub into a fortress. As chief of security, he had trained for this scenario. They all had. But training and reality were very different things. He had 32 security officers and about 60 colonists who had military experience. Against professional raiders, those numbers were not good, but Day wasn't planning to win. He was planning to survive long enough for help to arrive. "Barricade the eastern corridor," he shouted to a team dragging equipment containers. "Stack them 3 high. I want overlapping fields of fire." The raiders were good. Day could tell that from how they moved. They weren't random pirates. This was an organized military operation. They had disabled the shields with precision strikes. They knew exactly where to hit the station to cause maximum damage with minimum risk to themselves. That told Day something important. These raiders wanted the station intact. They wanted prisoners they could sell. That meant they would be cautious, and caution could be used against them. "Set up the pressure locks on levels 4 and 5, he ordered. "If they breach the hub, we flood those sections with coolant gas. Make them work for every meter." Dr. Hana sealed the last door to the lower labs and checked her tablet. Most of the research staff were secure in reinforced storage areas. It wasn't much protection, but it was better than nothing. She looked at the xenobiology samples locked in the containment units. Something bothered her about this attack. The Meridian Station wasn't wealthy. They didn't have valuable cargo or rare resources. They were a research outpost studying alien microorganisms. Who would raid a biology station? Unless they weren't here for random loot. Unless they knew exactly what was here. Hana pulled up her research files and started scanning through the recent projects. Her team had been studying samples from 17 different worlds. Most of it was routine work. Bacteria classification, viral analysis, nothing worth killing for. Then she saw it. Project Theta 9. A microorganism from a dead world that could break down any organic material it touched. In nature, it was harmless. It died within seconds outside very specific environmental conditions. But if someone could stabilize it, weaponize it, Hana felt sick. If these raiders knew about Theta 9, they weren't here to take slaves. They were here to steal a biological weapon. In the communications center, Tay was still sending updates every 30 seconds. His screen showed a single green light. Someone had received his signal. A human patrol ship called the Broken Arrow had acknowledged his transmission 6 hours ago. 6 hours. Tay did the math in his head. The nearest human ship would need at least 3 days to reach them at maximum speed. 3 days. Could they hold out that long? The door to the communications center exploded inward. Tay dove under the console as metal fragments flew across the room. He heard heavy footsteps. The raiders had found him. A shadow fell across his hiding spot. Tay looked up at the armored figure pointing a weapon at his head. The raider's helmet was dark, reflective. Tay couldn't see a face. "Turn it off," a mechanical voice said through the helmet's speakers. Tay's hand moved toward the controls, but instead of shutting down the transmission, he changed the frequency. He set the system to broadcast on a loop. Even if they killed him now, the message would keep sending. The raider must have seen what he did. The weapon swung down. Tay felt pain explode across his head, and then everything went dark. Day heard the weapon's fire getting closer. His security teams were falling back to the central hub. They had held the outer corridors for 3 hours. Now they were down to their last defensive line. "How many?" he asked into his communicator. "At least 60 raiders," came the reply. "Professional-grade weapons, military armor. We can't hold them much longer." Day looked at the civilians huddled in the hub's safe room. Families, children, people who had come to this station to build a better life far from Earth's crowded cities. People who trusted that the galaxy was safe enough for fresh starts. "Fall back to the hub," Day ordered. "We make our stand here." The hours crawled by. The raiders didn't rush. They moved slowly, systematically, clearing each section of the station. Day's teams fought for every corridor, every room, but the raiders kept coming. By the third day, Day had lost 18 of his security officers. The raiders controlled everything except the central hub. They had cut the power, cut the water, cut the air recycling to minimum levels. In the hub's command center, Day stared at the blank communication screens. No response to their distress signal. No rescue. Maybe no one was coming. Then, the station's external sensors flickered to life. Someone had restored partial power to the detection grid. Day pulled up the display and his breath caught in his throat. 17 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace. Not one ship, 17. And they were all broadcasting human military identification codes. Day grabbed his communicator. "All personnel, hold your positions. Help has arrived. Repeat, the cavalry just showed up." In his sealed command ship, the Kavalesh Raider commander saw the human fleet appear on his sensors. For the first time in 20 years of raiding, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Fear. Admiral Yuna stood perfectly still on the bridge of the Relentless. Around her, crew members moved with practiced efficiency. Screens displayed tactical information from all 17 ships in the fleet. They had come from 4 different sectors, but they moved like a single organism. "Distance to target?" Yuna asked. 300,000 kilometers and closing, the navigation officer replied. All ships in formation. Weapon systems ready. Beside Yuna, Fleet Commander Hyun studied the tactical display. His fingers moved across the holographic interface, adjusting positions with tiny gestures. Each ship responded instantly to his commands. The raiders have hostages, Hyun said quietly. They'll try to use them as leverage. Yuna's expression didn't change. They can try. On the bridge of the Broken Arrow, Captain Bora watched the Meridian station grow larger on her view screen. This was the ship that had first received Tay's distress signal. For 6 hours, Bora had been broadcasting the emergency code across every human military channel she could reach. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. "Reading 60 hostile contacts around the station," her tactical officer reported. "They're positioning themselves between us and the civilians." Bora leaned forward in her command chair. She had been fighting raiders for 23 years. She knew their tactics. They would threaten to kill hostages. They would demand safe passage. They would try to negotiate. "All weapons target the raider ships," Bora ordered. "Ignore their communications. We're not here to talk." The Kvalesh raider commander watched the human ships approach. His name was unpronounceable in human languages, but his reputation was well known. He had successfully raided 47 colonies in 2 years. He had never failed to secure his objectives. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. His translator software converted his words into standard galactic speech. "Human vessels, you are interfering with a legal salvage operation. We have 800 prisoners aboard this station. If you attack, they will be executed. Stand down immediately." For 10 seconds, there was no response. Then a woman's voice came through his speakers. It was calm and cold. "This is Admiral Yuna of the Human Defense Fleet. You have 30 seconds to release all hostages and surrender your ships. This is your only warning." The raider commander laughed. Humans always tried to sound tough, but they were soft. They cared about civilians. That made them weak. "You have no leverage here," he said. "We control the station. We control the prisoners. You will withdraw, or we will start sending you bodies." There was another pause. Then Admiral Yuna spoke again. "You chose the wrong species to threaten." The human ships opened fire. The raider commander had 1 second to be shocked before his shields collapsed under the barrage. The humans weren't using warning shots. They weren't trying to disable his engines. They were trying to destroy him. His ship shuddered as weapons fire tore through the hull. Around him, his crew scrambled to return fire. But the human ships were everywhere. They moved with impossible coordination, each one covering the others, each one firing at precisely the right moment. "All ships, fall back to the station," the commander ordered. "Use the civilians as shields." But the human fleet had already anticipated that move. Half the ships broke formation and circled around to cut off the retreat. The other half pressed the attack, driving the raiders away from the station. Inside the Meridian Station Central Hub, Day and his security team heard the sounds of battle through the walls. Energy weapons flashed outside the viewports. Explosions lit up the darkness of space. "They're fighting," someone whispered. Day watched the tactical display. The human ships were surgical in their precision. They weren't just attacking. They were herding the raiders, forcing them away from the station, eliminating escape routes one by one. "Incoming transmission," his communications officer said. "It's from the human fleet." Day activated the channel. A woman's voice filled the hub. "Meridian Station, this is Captain Bora of the Broken Arrow. We're coming to get you. Hold your position and mark your defensive perimeters. Marine teams will be boarding in approximately 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Day looked at his exhausted security teams. They had held for 3 days. They could hold for 12 more minutes. "You heard the captain," Day shouted. "Lock down all access points. No one gets through our lines. 12 minutes, people. We can do this." Marine Commander Jay stood in the boarding pod, checking his weapon for the 3rd time. Around him, 40 Marines in full combat armor made their final preparations. They had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times. 2 minutes to contact, the pilot announced. Jay activated his helmet display. It showed the station's layout and the positions of Day's security teams. The raiders had concentrated their forces near the central hub. That meant the civilians were still alive. Good. Listen up, Jay said to his team. Our priority is civilian safety. You see a hostage, you protect them. You see a raider, you neutralize them. Fast and clean. Questions? There were no questions. These Marines knew their job. The boarding pod hit the station's hull with a metallic clang. Cutting torches activated, burning through the exterior plating. 30 seconds later, the Marines were inside. The raiders guarding the boarding point never had a chance. Jay's team moved through them like a knife through water. Weapons fire echoed in the corridors. Raiders fell before they could even raise their guns. Section Alpha secure, Jay reported, moving to link up with station security. 3 more boarding pods hit different parts of the station. Marines poured through the breaches. The raiders suddenly found themselves fighting on multiple fronts against an enemy that showed no hesitation and no mercy. Day heard the sound of human boots in the corridor outside the hub. He raised his weapon, then lowered it when he saw the identification markers on their armor. "Station security?" the lead Marine asked. "That's us," Day replied. The Marine nodded. "Good work holding the position. We'll take it from here. Get your people and the civilians to the evacuation points. Transport ships are standing by." Day wanted to argue. He wanted to keep fighting. But he looked at his exhausted security teams and knew the Marine was right. They had done their part. Now it was time to let the professionals finish it. "Move out," Day ordered his people. "Get the civilians to safety." In orbit, the space battle was ending. The raider ships that hadn't been destroyed were trying to run, but the human fleet had formed a net around them. Every escape route was blocked. Admiral Yuna watched the tactical display with satisfaction. 90 minutes since the first shot. Already the raiders were broken. "Admiral Bao, we're receiving a transmission from the raider commander," her communications officer said. "He's requesting surrender terms." Yuna considered that for a moment. "Tell him we accept unconditional surrender only. All ships to be boarded, all prisoners to be released, all weapons to be powered down. He has 60 seconds to comply." The raider commander's voice came through, desperate now. "You can't do this. We have rights under galactic salvage laws. We have rights as prisoners of war." "You have exactly the rights you gave to the people on that station," Yuna replied, "which is to say, none. 50 seconds. The raider ships powered down their weapons. Inside the station, Jay's Marines swept through the remaining sections. They found Tay unconscious in the communications center. They found Dr. Hana and the research staff sealed in the lower labs. They found families huddled in storage rooms, terrified but alive. The raiders who surrendered were taken into custody. The ones who fought were eliminated quickly and efficiently. There was no drama, no heroic last stands. The Marines were too professional for that. 2 hours after the fleet arrived, it was over. Every raider was either captured or dead. Every civilian was accounted for. The station was secure. Jay found Day coordinating the evacuation of wounded. "Your security teams did well," Jay said. 3 days against professional raiders. That's impressive. Day looked at the Marine. "We lost 18 people. And you saved 829, Jay replied. "Don't discount that." On the medical frigate Sanctuary, Dr. Hana sat in the observation deck and watched the Meridian station slowly receding in the distance. She was alive. Her staff was alive. The civilians were alive. She couldn't stop shaking. A voice spoke from the doorway. "Dr. Hana?" She turned to see Captain Bora standing there. "I wanted to thank you," Bora said. Your quick thinking sealing the lab saved lives. The raiders were looking for your research samples." "How did you know?" Hana asked. "We've been tracking the Kavalesh for months. We knew they were looking for biological materials. When we got your distress signal, we knew it was them." "Why did so many ships come?" Hana's voice was barely a whisper. "We're just a small research station. We're not important." Bora sat down beside her. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she said, "My home colony was raided when I was 8 years old. The distress signal went out, but help came too late. I survived because I hid in a storage container. I listened to the screaming and couldn't do anything." She looked at Hana directly. "Every person on this fleet has a story like that. We all lost someone. We all remember what it's like to be helpless. That's why 17 ships came for one station. Because we swore it would never happen again. Not on our watch." In the detention area of the Relentless, the captured Kivalesh commander sat in his cell. Admiral Yuna stood outside, studying him through the force field. "Why?" the raider asked. "Why such a response for one small station?" Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would be repeated across the galaxy in the months to come. "Because we remember what it's like to be alone and afraid. And we've sworn no one else will feel that way if we can help it. You threatened people under our protection. This is the consequence." The raider commander had no response to that. Dr. Hana sat in the medical frigate's interview room with a recording device between her and Captain Bora. The station administrators wanted a complete report of what had happened. Hana had been asking questions for 2 hours now. She needed to understand. "The regulations say you should have waited for authorization before activating the emergency beacon," Hana said carefully. "You could have been disciplined for that decision. Why did you do it?" Bora looked at her hands. They were scarred from years of service. Old burn marks crossed her knuckles. "I was 9 years old when the raiders came to my home," Bora said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were far away. "Colony 7, on the edge of the Outer Rim. We were farmers. Nobody important. Just families trying to make a living." Hana waited. She didn't interrupt. "My father was the communications officer," Bora continued. "He sent the distress signal. He sent it over and over. For 3 days, we hid in the underground shelters while the raiders took everything. We heard them above us, heard them breaking things, burning things." Bora's jaw tightened. Help came on the 4th day. By then, the raiders were gone. They had taken 200 people. My mother was one of them. The rescue ships apologized. They said they had to wait for proper authorization. They said there were protocols. "I'm sorry," Hana whispered. "I joined the fleet when I was 17, Bora said. "I learned everything about communications, about emergency signals, about protocols, and I made myself a promise. If I ever heard that silence, that desperate call for help, I would not wait for anyone's permission. I would go." She looked directly at Hana. "That's why I activated the beacon. That's why I'll do it again if I have to. Let them discipline me. At least the people I save will be alive to see it." 2 decks above, Admiral Yuna was in a meeting with Fleet Commander Hyun. They were reviewing the battle reports. The operation had been successful, but success came with questions. "The Senate is going to ask why we committed so many resources," Hyun said. 17 ships for one station. They'll say it was excessive." Yuna pulled up a file on her display. It was old, 23 years old. The images showed a burning space station, bodies floating in the void, rescue ships arriving too late. "This was the Horizon settlement," Yuna said. "My family lived there. My parents, my sister, my younger brother. I was off-world at university when the raiders attacked. By the time the fleet arrived, everyone was dead or taken." Hyun had heard this story before, but he listened quietly. "The official report said the response time was acceptable," Yuna continued. Her voice was cold now. "Acceptable. My 10-year-old brother died because the response time was acceptable. My sister was sold into slavery because protocols required 3 levels of authorization before ships could deploy. She closed the file. I didn't join the military for revenge. I joined because I never wanted another family to wait for an acceptable response time. If the Senate doesn't understand that, they can find another admiral. Hyun nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I understand completely. Your story? Yuna asked. I was a civilian engineer, Hyun said. I worked on a cargo station in the Fornax sector. We had basic security, nothing military. When the raiders came, we had no defense. I watched them kill the station master when he tried to protect the children in the education center. His hands moved across the tactical display out of habit, even though there was no battle to coordinate now. I hid in an access tunnel, Hyun said. I'm not proud of that. I heard the screaming and I hid. When the fleet finally arrived, I told them everything I saw. Then I applied to join them. If I couldn't stop myself from hiding, at least I could help make sure the rescue ships came faster. In the Marine barracks, Jay was running maintenance on his armor. The other Marines knew to leave him alone after a mission. He needed time to process, to remember, to carry the weight. A young Marine named Kwan approached anyway. He was new, fresh from training. This had been his first real combat operation. Commander, Kwan said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Jay didn't look up from his work. Make it quick. Why do we prioritize civilians over capturing enemies? The raiders have intelligence we could use, but you ordered us to eliminate them if they got too close to the hostages. Jay set down his tools. He looked at Kwan for a long moment. I was 22 years old, Jay said. I was assigned to the defense station above my homeworld. It was supposed to be a quiet posting. Nothing ever happened in our sector. He picked up his helmet, turned it over in his hands. I was off duty, in the station gym, when the raiders hit the planet below. The attack came so fast. We tried to respond, but our weapons couldn't target them without hitting civilian areas. So we waited for clear shots. We followed proper combat protocols. His voice got quieter. By the time we had clear shots, 7,000 people were dead. My parents lived in the capital city. They died waiting for us to follow protocols. Jay looked directly at Kwan. So now you know why we prioritize civilians. Because I learned that following every rule perfectly doesn't matter if everyone you're trying to protect is dead. You eliminate the threat first. You worry about intelligence gathering later. Questions? No, sir, Kwan said softly. On the sanctuary, Tae was awake now. The medical team had treated his concussion. He was sitting up in bed when Dr. Hana came to visit him. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I got hit in the head with a rifle, Tae said with a weak smile. But I'll live. Did the message get through? It did, Hana confirmed. You saved all of us. Tae shook his head. I just sent a signal. The fleet saved us. About that, Hana said. I wanted to understand something. I spoke with one of the communications officers from the Broken Arrow. Her name is Na. She said she monitors 17 different distress channels simultaneously. Why 17? Tae didn't know the answer, so Hana told him what she had learned. Officer Na had lost her entire family to a raider attack. She had been on a school trip to another planet. When she came home, her colony was empty. Everyone was gone. The distress signal had been sent, but it went to a channel that nobody was monitoring at that moment. She told me she checked 17 channels because that's how many different emergency frequencies exist in this sector, Hana explained. She made sure that what happened to her colony would never happen again because nobody was listening. Tae was quiet for a long time. Then he said, They all have stories like that, don't they? Everyone on these ships. Most of them, Hana confirmed. Captain Bora told me that over 40% of the senior officers in the human fleet are survivors of attacks or disasters. They're not fighting for glory or territory. They're fighting so nobody else has to experience what they experienced. Down in the detention area, Day was working with human intelligence officers. They were interviewing the captured raiders, gathering information about the Kavalesh organization. Day was good at this kind of work. He understood how criminals thought. One of the intelligence officers was a woman named Mira. She worked with Day for 6 hours before taking a break. They sat in the observation room, drinking coffee. "You're very good at this," Mira said. "Have you considered joining Fleet Intelligence?" Day looked surprised. "I'm just station security. I'm not military." "You held off 60 professional raiders for 3 days with a security team," Mira pointed out. "You're tactical, creative, and you understand defensive operations. That's exactly what we need." "Why?" Day asked. "Why would the fleet need someone like me?" Mira pulled up a star map. It showed hundreds of colonies, stations, and settlements scattered across dozens of sectors. "Every one of these locations is vulnerable," she said. "We can't protect all of them at once, but we can identify which ones are most at risk. We can train their security forces. We can teach them how to hold out long enough for help to arrive." "That's what you did. You bought time. You kept people alive. We need to teach others how to do the same." She looked at him seriously. "The fleet is starting a new program. We're training multi-species security forces in defensive tactics. We need people who have actually faced these situations. People who understand what it's like when the cavalry hasn't arrived yet." Day thought about the 18 people he had lost, the families who would never see them again. If he could teach others how to save more lives, wasn't that worth doing? "When do I start?" he asked. 3 days later, the survivors of Meridian Station held a memorial service. They gathered in the sanctuary's main hangar, which had been converted into a temporary memorial hall. 14 names were read aloud, 14 people who hadn't survived to see the rescue. Admiral Yuna attended the service. So did Captain Bora, Commander Hyun, and Marine Commander Jay. They stood with the families and listened to the names. When it was over, a young girl approached Yuna. She was maybe 7 years old. Her family was from one of the non-human species on the station. "You're the Admiral," the girl said. "I am," Yuna replied. "You scared the bad people away." "My fleet did, yes." The girl looked up at her with wide eyes. "You were scary. But you were only scary to the bad people, not to us. Thank you." Yuna knelt down so she was at the girl's eye level. "You're welcome. And you're right. We're only scary to the bad people. The good people never have to be afraid of us." The girl hugged her and ran back to her parents. Later that night, a galactic news correspondent interviewed some of the survivors. The interview would be broadcast across hundreds of worlds. When asked about their rescuers, the same young girl repeated what she had told Yuna. "They were scary, but only to the bad people." The reporter asked Captain Bora why the fleet had responded so strongly to one distress call. Bora's answer was simple. "Because we heard the silence before, when no one came. We swore we'd never let that happen again." The interview went viral. Within a week, 100 billion people had watched it. And they all learned the same thing. When humans heard a cry for help, they didn't calculate the cost. They didn't wait for authorization. They simply came. And they came with everything they had. 3 months after the Meridian rescue, the Galactic Senate convened an emergency session. The Grand Chamber was filled with representatives from 47 different species. The topic of discussion was one word that made some delegates nervous and others hopeful: humans. The Kavalesh representative stood at the central podium. His species had dominated raiding operations in this sector for decades. Now he was demanding justice. "The humans have committed an act of war," he declared. His voice echoed through the chamber. "They attacked Kavalesh vessels engaged in legal salvage operations. They imprisoned our citizens without trial. We demand the return of our detained personnel and compensation for destroyed property." There was murmuring throughout the chamber. Some species nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. The human delegation sat quietly in their section. Admiral Una was there, along with several other fleet commanders. She wore her dress uniform, medals across her chest. Beside her sat Dr. Hana and Tay. They had been brought as witnesses. The Senate mediator, a tall being from the Vex species, called for order. "The human delegation may respond," the mediator said. Una stood. She walked to the podium without hurry. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "The Kvalesh representative calls it salvage," Una said. "We call it slavery. The Meridian Station was not abandoned property. It was a functioning research facility with 847 living beings. The Kvalesh attacked without provocation, killed 14 civilians, and attempted to kidnap the survivors. This was not salvage. This was piracy." The Kvalesh representative interrupted. "You have no proof of our intentions." Una smiled. It was not a friendly expression. She activated the chamber's central display. Images appeared in the air above them. Cargo manifests, communication intercepts, financial records. "These are records from the captured Kvalesh ships," Una said. "They show purchase orders for slave collars. They show communications discussing the market value of different species. They show payment receipts from previous raids, 47 colonies attacked in the last 2 years, over 15,000 people sold into slavery." The chamber went silent. The evidence was overwhelming. "We've been tracking you for 8 months," Una continued, looking directly at the Kvalesh representative. "We know every raid, every ship, every base. We have the names of your buyers, we have the locations of your slave markets, and we have something else." She changed the display. Now it showed a star map with 17 points marked in red. "These are the locations of Kvalesh strongholds," Una said. "Hidden bases where you keep your operations, where you hold prisoners before selling them, where you store your stolen goods." The Kvalesh representative's skin changed color, a sign of distress in his species. "As of this moment," Una said, "each of these locations is surrounded by human fleet vessels. We tracked your ships back to their origins. We know where everything is." She paused to let that sink in. "So here is our proposal," Una continued. "You return every person you have taken in the last 10 years. All of them. We verify their safe return and provide them with transport home. In exchange, we return your detained personnel, and we don't destroy every Kvalesh military installation in this sector." The chamber exploded with arguments. Some representatives shouted that this was extortion. Others demanded to know why the Kvalesh had been allowed to operate for so long. The Kvalesh representative tried to regain control. "You're bluffing. You don't have the resources to threaten all our installations simultaneously." Una's expression didn't change. "Test that theory if you want. But know this. We're not bluffing. We have 63 ships positioned around your strongholds. They have authorization to act if you refuse our terms. You have 72 hours to decide." A representative from the Taurian species stood up. He was an old diplomat, respected across the galaxy. "Admiral Una," he said carefully, "what you're proposing is an ultimatum backed by military force. Some would call that terrorism." "Some would," Una agreed. "Others would call it justice. The people your laws failed to protect might call it hope. I call it a choice. The Kvalesh can return the people they stole, or we will take them back by force." Dr. Hana was called to testify next. She walked to the podium, feeling small in the vast chamber. But when she spoke, her voice was strong. "I'm a scientist," Hana said. "I study microorganisms. I'm not a soldier or a politician. But I was on Meridian Station when the raiders came. I watched them kill people. I watched them hunt us through the corridors. We sent a distress signal, not knowing if anyone would hear it or if anyone would care." She looked around the chamber. The humans cared. They came with everything they had. Not because we were valuable. not because we had resources they wanted. They came because we needed help, and they're here now demanding justice because that's what they do. They protect people. She stepped away from the podium, her testimony complete. Tay spoke next. His head was still bandaged from the injuries he had received. "I'm a communications officer," he said. "I sent the distress signal that brought the human fleet. Before I was knocked unconscious, I saw the raiders. They had done this before. They moved like professionals. They knew exactly how to attack a civilian station." He activated a recording. It was audio from the raider communications during the attack. "This is them discussing how much they could sell us for," Tay said. "Our price per person, which species were worth more on the slave markets, whether the children would be sold separately or with their families." The recording played through the chamber. It was cold, clinical. The raiders discussed people like they were cargo. The chamber was silent when it finished. Over the next 3 days, the Senate debated. The galaxy was divided. Some species supported the human position. They had lost people to raiders, too. They had sent distress signals that went unanswered. They understood what the humans were trying to do. Other species feared human military power. If humans could surround Kavalesh strongholds so easily, what else could they do? If they were willing to threaten war over one station, where would they stop? The debates grew heated. Accusations flew. Old alliances were questioned. New ones formed. Through it all, Admiral Yuna waited. The 72-hour deadline approached. On the final day, the Kavalesh representative requested a private meeting. It was attended by only the highest-level delegates. What was discussed in that meeting remained classified, but when it was over, the Kavalesh representative looked defeated. He stood before the Senate and made an announcement. "The Kavalesh Consortium rejects the human ultimatum," he said. "We will not surrender our operations or our personnel under threat. We call the human bluff." Admiral Yuna checked her timepiece. The deadline had just passed. She activated her communication device. She sent one simple message to the fleet. "Execute." Across 17 systems, human warships opened fire simultaneously. The attacks were coordinated with perfect precision. The Kavalesh strongholds had defensive systems, weapons platforms, and guard ships. None of it mattered. The human fleets had planned for months. They knew every weakness, every blind spot, every tactical advantage. The battles were short and brutal. Within 24 hours, all 17 strongholds had fallen. The human fleets broadcast the same message to every captured installation. "Release all prisoners. Provide medical care. We are coming to get them." The galactic news networks showed the footage. Thousands of prisoners being freed. Humans walking through former slave markets, breaking chains, carrying children to safety. The Senate was forced to reconvene. The Kavalesh Consortium had collapsed. Without their strongholds, without their operations, they had no power. The representative who had challenged Yuna was nowhere to be seen. Admiral Yuna stood before the Senate again. "We found 43,000 prisoners in those installations," she said. 43,000 people from 19 different species. Some had been held for years. Some were children who didn't remember their homes. She paused. "We're returning all of them to their families. The human fleet will provide transport and medical care. We're also sharing all the intelligence we gathered about the raider networks, where they operate, how they move, who buys from them." A representative from the Thalen species stood. Her people had lost a colony to raiders 5 years ago. "What do the humans want in return?" she asked. "What is your price for this service?" Yuna looked tired. "We don't want anything. We want the galaxy to be safer. We want distress signals to be answered. We want children to grow up without fear of being stolen in the night." She looked around the chamber. "But if you want to help, here's what you can do. Create real laws against piracy. Fund rescue operations. Train security forces. Don't make people wait for authorization while raiders attack. Don't tell families that help will come in acceptable response time while their loved ones are dying. Another representative stood. The humans took aggressive action without Senate approval. This sets a dangerous precedent. Yes, Yuna agreed. It does. It sets the precedent that when people cry for help, someone will come. If that's dangerous to your way of doing things, then maybe your way of doing things needs to change. The debate continued for weeks, but the reality was clear. 12 raider organizations had voluntarily surrendered to avoid facing human retaliation. The slave markets in 3 sectors had shut down completely. Piracy rates dropped by 60% in the following months. Dr. Hana returned to oversee the rebuilding of Meridian Station. Tai joined her as the new Chief of Security Communications. The station was expanded, reinforced, and designated as a protected research facility. And in orbit above it, a human frigate remained on permanent station. It was part of a new initiative called the Red Fleet. Captain Bora was promoted to commander of the program. Her mission was simple: maintain rapid response ships throughout the galaxy, ships that would answer any distress call from any species, ships that wouldn't wait for authorization or debate response times. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of that change, whether the politicians liked it or not. 1 year after the attack, Dr. Hana walked through the memorial garden she had built on Meridian Station. 847 trees grew here, one for each person who had been on the station that day. 14 of the trees had special markers. Those were for the ones who hadn't survived. The station was bigger now, stronger. The walls were reinforced. The security systems were military-grade, but most importantly, it was alive again. Researchers from a dozen species worked in the labs. Children played in the parks. Life continued. Above the station, a human ship hung in permanent orbit. It was called the Guardian, and its presence was a promise. Never again. Hana's tablet buzzed. She had a class to teach in 20 minutes. She was a professor now, in addition to running the research programs. Her students came from across the galaxy to study at Meridian. The station had become famous as the place where everything changed. She walked to the lecture hall. 30 students waited for her, their faces representing 15 different species. They were here to learn xenobiology. But Hana knew they were also here to understand what had happened. Today, we'll discuss the final topic of the semester, Hana began. The xenobiological samples that the raiders wanted to steal, Project Theta 9. Can anyone tell me what made it valuable? A student raised their hand. It was a microorganism that could break down any organic material. If weaponized, it could destroy entire ecosystems. Correct, Hana said. The raiders knew about this research. They came specifically to steal it. But they didn't succeed. Does anyone know why? Another student spoke up. Because the human fleet arrived before they could access the secured labs. Partially correct, Hana said. But the deeper answer is more important. They failed because people fought back. Because Security Chief Day held the defensive positions. Because Communications Officer Tay kept sending the distress signal even after being injured. Because 847 people refused to give up hope. She pulled up images on the classroom display. They showed the battle, the rescue, the aftermath. The humans didn't arrive by magic, Hana continued. They arrived because someone called for help and someone was listening. That's the lesson I want you to remember. Not the biology, although that's important. The real lesson is about what happens when people refuse to accept that violence and cruelty are inevitable. A student from the Taurian species raised his hand. Professor? Many species say the human response was too aggressive, that they should have negotiated instead of attacking. What do you think? Hana considered the question carefully. I think that's a fair debate. But I was there. I heard the raiders discussing how much money they'd make selling us. I watched them kill people who tried to resist. So when someone asks if the humans were too aggressive, I asked them. How much negotiation do you do with someone who sees you as merchandise? She walked to the window. The Guardian was visible as a bright point of light. The humans taught the galaxy something important, Hana said. They taught us that some things are worth fighting for, that protecting innocent lives matters more than following comfortable protocols, that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do. After class, Hana had a meeting with Tai. He was now the director of communications for the entire station. His systems monitored not just their own distress channels, but helped coordinate the new galaxy-wide emergency network. How's the new system working? Hana asked. Tai pulled up statistics on his tablet. Response times are down 60% across the board. We've answered 43 distress calls in the past year. Not all of them were raids. Some were medical emergencies, equipment failures, natural disasters, but every one of them got help fast. Any problems? Some species complain that humans are too quick to respond with military force, Tai admitted. Last month, a cargo ship had an engine failure. The nearest human ship jumped to their location fully armed, expecting a fight. The cargo captain said it was excessive. Hana smiled slightly. But they got rescued. They got rescued? Tai agreed. That's what Officer Na says when people complain. She says she'd rather be excessive and have people safe than be cautious and have people dead. She's right, Hana said. How is she doing, by the way? Still monitoring 17 channels simultaneously, Tai said. She trained 6 other communications officers to do the same. The Red Fleet is expanding. Commander Bora just commissioned 5 more rapid response ships. Across the galaxy, in the Red Fleet headquarters, Captain Bora was indeed expanding the program. She sat in a meeting with Fleet Commander Hyun and a dozen other officers. They were planning the next phase of operations. We have 23 ships now, Hyun said, pointing to markers on the star map. We can cover most of the major trade routes and colony clusters. But there are still gaps. Then we fill the gaps, Bora said simply. Every sector needs coverage. Every colony needs to know that if they call for help, someone will answer. A younger officer spoke up. Commander, some political groups are calling this military overreach. They say we're becoming the galaxy's police force without permission. Bora looked at him. Are you asking me to care about their opinion? I'm asking if we should be concerned about the political backlash. Let me tell you what I'm concerned about, Bora said. I'm concerned about the child who hides in a storage container while raiders destroy her home. I'm concerned about the family that sends a distress signal into the void and wonders if anyone is listening. I'm concerned about the people who die because help came too late. She stood and walked to the star map. If politicians want to debate our methods, they can. But while they're debating, we'll be saving lives. Questions? There were no questions. In another part of the galaxy, Day was running a training exercise. He had taken the position with fleet intelligence and now taught security forces from multiple species how to defend against raiders. Your job is not to win, Day told the 30 officers in his class. Your job is to survive. Buy time. Keep your people alive until help arrives. That's all defense is. Buying time. He showed them recordings from the Meridian attack. How his security teams had used the station's layout to their advantage, how they had created choke points and fallback positions, how they had prioritized civilian safety over tactical advantage. Notice what I didn't do, Day said. I didn't try to fight them in open corridors. I didn't attempt heroic counterattacks. I found defensible positions and held them, boring, unglamorous, effective. A student asked, But you lost people. 18 security officers died. Could you have saved them? Day was quiet for a moment. Maybe, if I'd taken more risks, if I'd been more aggressive. But I also might have lost everyone. I made the choice to prioritize survival over victory. It's not a choice I'm proud of, it's just the choice I made. He looked at each student in turn. You'll face the same choice someday. When you do, remember this. A dead hero doesn't save anyone. A living defender can keep fighting, keep thinking, keep protecting. That's what matters. Admiral Yuna had retired from active service but remained an advisor to the human fleet. She spent most of her time now working with the families of freed slaves, helping them rebuild their lives. Today, she was visiting a rehabilitation center on Earth. Hundreds of people who had been rescued from Kavalesh installations were here, learning to adjust to freedom again. A young girl approached her. She was maybe 12 years old now. Yuna recognized her. She had been one of the prisoners freed from the first stronghold the fleet had attacked. "Admiral Yuna," the girl said shyly. "Hello again," Yuna replied with a gentle smile. "How are you doing?" "Better," the girl said. "The doctors say I'm healing. I'm going home next month, back to my family." "That's wonderful news." The girl hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything to save us? You didn't know us. We weren't even human." Yuna knelt down to the girl's level, just as she had done a year ago on the sanctuary. "Because a long time ago I needed help and it didn't come," Yuna said. "I lost my family because people followed rules instead of doing what was right. I promised myself that I would never let that happen to anyone else if I could prevent it." "But we're not your family," the girl said. "You are now," Yuna replied. "Everyone who calls for help becomes our family. That's what it means to be human. We remember what it's like to be vulnerable. We remember what it's like to be afraid. And we've decided that no one should have to feel that way alone." The girl hugged her tightly. Yuna held her and thought about all the people they had saved. 43,000 from the strongholds, hundreds more from answered distress calls. How many more in the years to come? Marine Commander Jay had taken a teaching position as well. He trained the next generation of boarding specialists. His classes were known for being extremely difficult, but also extremely effective. "Pain is temporary," he told his students during a training exercise. "Death is permanent. Failure to protect civilians is unforgivable." In that order of priority. Questions? One brave student asked. "Sir, what if we can't save everyone?" Jay's expression softened slightly. "Then you save who you can. You make the hard choices. You live with the consequences, and you never stop trying to do better next time." He pulled up a tactical scenario. "Let's run this again. 20 hostiles, 40 civilians. You have a 10-person team. Show me how you save the maximum number of lives. Go." Back at Meridian Station, the day's classes were ending. Students filed out of Dr. Hana's lecture hall, talking among themselves about the lesson. One student, a young human named Minho, stayed behind. "Professor," he said, "I have a question that's not about biology." "What is it?" "My friends from other species say that humans are violent, that we're too quick to fight, that we scare them sometimes. Is that true?" Hana thought about her answer carefully. "Yes," she said. "It's true. Humans can be violent. They can be scary, but there's something important to understand about that." She gestured out the window toward the Guardian. "That ship orbits our station every day. The crew aboard it is trained for war. They have weapons that could destroy this entire station in minutes, and yet, I sleep better knowing they're there. Do you know why?" Minho shook his head. "Because they're only violent toward threats," Hana explained. "They're only scary to people who hurt others. That little girl was right a year ago. The humans were scary, but only to the bad people. The rest of us, they protected, they sacrificed for, they risked their lives for." She sat on the edge of her desk. "Humans have a saying, 'Not on our watch.' It means that while they're here, while they're listening, they won't let innocent people suffer. Sometimes that requires violence. Sometimes that requires being scary. But it also requires compassion, sacrifice, and an absolute refusal to abandon people in need." Minho thought about that. So being scary isn't a bad thing? Being scary to protect others is different from being scary to hurt others, Hana said. The first is courage. The second is cruelty. Never confuse the two. As the sun set on Meridian Station, Dr. Hana stood in the memorial garden one last time. The trees swayed in the artificial breeze. The 14 markers glowed softly in the dimming light. She thought about everything that had changed. The Red Fleet now had 50 ships and growing. The Galactic Distress Network was functioning better than ever. Piracy rates had dropped 70%. 12 species had asked for human assistance in training their security forces. But more than the numbers, something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had learned that when someone called for help, humans would answer. They would come with weapons and ships and absolute determination. They would risk everything to protect people they had never met. It wasn't about being the strongest species. Humans weren't. It wasn't about having the best technology. They didn't. It was about being the species that remembered what it felt like to be helpless. The species that had decided never to let others feel that way if they could help it. In orbit above, the Guardian's crew changed shifts. Sensors monitored the distress frequencies. Communications officers listened to the void. Marines stayed ready to deploy at a moment's notice, because somewhere in the galaxy, someone would need help, and humanity would answer. That was the lesson the galaxy had learned. That was the promise humanity had made, not on our watch.